Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has wrapped up an 11-day trip to the United States and South America, aimed at expanding Korea's economic and diplomatic partnerships. In San Francisco, the focus was on AI, semiconductors, and next-generation technologies. And in Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, the agenda shifted to critical minerals, energy security, and trade. The visit also marked President Lee's completion of bilateral summits with every G20 member except Russia, as Korea looks ahead to hosting the G20 in 2028. So today we examine what this trip accomplished and what it could mean for Korea's global strategy moving forward. And for this, we are joined in the studio by Song Soo-young, Professor of Business and Economics at Chung-Ang University. A very big welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having me here.
And also joining us online is Mason Rishi, Professor of International Politics at Korea University of Foreign Studies. Good to see you again, Professor.
Great, thanks for having me.
So let's start a discussion with President Lee's latest trip, of course, which focused on two key goals, strengthening high-tech cooperation in San Francisco and expanding strategic partnerships in South America. So looking at the visit as a whole, Professor Rishi, how well do you think those two goals have worked together?
Yeah, so the U.S. stop supported really the connection at the top of the tech industry. Lee Jae-myung was in San Francisco acting as a salesman to leading U.S. companies, including NVIDIA and other major AI players, on behalf of SK Hynix, on behalf of Samsung, the general South Korean tech industry, robotics, various parts of the chip manufacturing process and various parts of that supply chain, and of course the AI industry. And that's a very typical thing for a president, especially a middle power president like Lee Jae-myung, to do, essentially acting as a sort of supporter and cheerleader for important business branches. But all of that top level stuff requires downstream fundamental inputs, notably critical minerals, as you mentioned, in the supply chain. And that was really what the second part of the trip to the U.S., to the Americas, was about, notably in South America, this time Argentina and Chile, which of course have large mineral deposits. The synergy of the upper and the lower end of the high-tech supply chains is an important part of the development of AI and high-tech industry all by itself, of course, regardless of who the partners are. But the larger context, in some sense, or a specific version, perhaps, of this context, is that South Korea, like other countries that are middle power tech players, is also trying to diversify away from over-reliance on the U.S. And China and a few other problematic major partners. And this South America swing was one part of the effort to do so.
Right. It certainly covered a wide range of priorities under one trip. But first, on the U.S. leg of the trip, Professor Rishi, the AI summit in San Francisco, it marked a shift beyond the traditional security alliance and towards a closer cooperation in AI and semiconductors as well. How significant is that shift?
Yeah, so on this point, I think that the Lee Jae-myung administration, in terms of the policies that it is advancing, is in part simply realizing a set of measures that have already been in place in various forms since at least the Biden administration. So if we think back to the Taylor, Texas Samsung plant, that dates back to 2022, groundbreaking during the Biden administration. SK Hynix's facilities in the U.S., for instance, a packaging plant that's coming online in West Lafayette, Indiana, if memory serves, got subsidy funding from the U.S. Chips and Sciences Act, which also came from 2022. We know that Hyundai and its suppliers have been putting battery facilities in the U.S. also connected with that. There are all kinds of firms working in critical minerals, robotics, small modular nuclear reactors. All that cooperation, both on the political and the business side, dates back to at least the Biden administration, if not even to the first Trump administration. in some cases. And we, of course, have the Chip 4 alliance, where there was a real political convergence among the US, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan regarding semiconductor development being coordinated notably in a way to try to reduce some of China's access to high-end chips. So in that sense, Lee Jae-myung's support for continued investment into the U.S. is really just an ongoing cooperation from 2022 and even earlier. The difference, of course, is that South Korea is now engaging in this and cooperating with the United States in this regard with a much more coercive and transactional United States. And that has some upsides, right? One of the upsides is that, for instance, the investment in the U.S. That South Korea is putting in as a part of Trump's tariff measures will, allow South Korea to sort of trade that in part for nuclear-powered submarine development and associated technologies, which is something that South Korea has wanted. On the other hand, this type of convergence of tech industry and security and defense partnership spillover also represents some risk, because the U.S. can, of course, use its leverage as a security and defense ally of South Korea to coerce South Korea into making investment decisions and also defense and security decisions that it may not want to do by using one of those two levers in a way that can be quite painful for South Korea.
Right. So the alliance itself, it seems to be evolving together as well, alongside the situation. Now, if we build on that, Professor Song, so the summit itself, it produced concrete outcomes, including semiconductor cooperation and the AI data center investment as well. So how do you think these kinds of achievements could strengthen global competitiveness of Korean companies?
Yeah, I'd like to start with some mention about the feature of the U.S. government. Actually, Professor Ritchie has mentioned the coercive and transactional U.S. government. So facing that challenge, and President Lee has started July 24th, the very 10-day long journey. And it starts at San Francisco with a meeting with Anthropic and also OpenAI, NVIDIA, and Broadcom. All of these four companies are very famous for some kind of at the front of the AI semiconductor to be developed for the usage of the several wide range of some advanced technology. But on the other hand, South Korea is we have equipped with very strong dynamic RAM semiconductor and HBM produced, manufactured by the Samsung and SK Hynix. Another one strong company is actually Micron in United States. Of course, recently we have seen that some public offering by the CXMT in China, Changxin Semiconductor, could be a rival and in the future, but not yet they have not yet have reached such a very highly refined level of the production. So to that regards, this meeting would be a really our government has declared that this is a kind of summit meeting for AI, for the future physical AI and the mega project. But what I'm concerned a little bit about this one is this may be always in the old Oriental adage. There is a story about the excess may not be better than falling short. So I think, of course, this is a very ambitious commitment and to make a progress in the upcoming years. But we have to be always careful, and risk management is a necessary step for the South Korean economy, because always it seems to me a little bit too optimistic has prevailed the current situation. So what we have to be careful about is what we missed, and not much pessimistic at all, but I still hold some optimistic view about the AI in the future. But however, always we have to be careful.
Right. So at the end of the day, it really matters if these ambitions would actually bring to concrete results moving forward. Now, if we shift a little bit to South America, Professor Ritchie, what do you think was the broader significance of President Lee's visit to three countries, especially as Korea looks to deepen ties with the global South?
Yeah, so as I said, there's in some sense a real continuity in Lee Jae-myung's policy, and in some sense dating back to prior administrations with the U.S. and South Korea, but also within his own, security and trade apparatus. They're seemingly following a strategy of developing diplomatic pathways for cooperation with middle powers. And so we're seeing that take place in other contexts, not just in this big swing through the Americas. We've seen that at APEC last year, G20, of course, last year in South Africa, the UN General Assembly, where Lee Jae-myung and others hold meetings with important middle power counterparts on a lot of the issues that we're talking about here. And of course, there have been a series of bilateral meetings that Lee has used to add some very particular, one-on-one attention to some of these types of issues, namely in Brazil, India, Vietnam, South Africa. And I really think this illustrates that Lee Jae-myung is actually showing some dedication to cooperation with middle powers, including developing economies, to find alternate mechanisms for cooperation, given the broken international order that we see now. We'll see how well it ends up working. For those of you who have been paying some attention to the online world, U.S. Undersecretary of Defense for Policy Elbridge Colby had a very long Twitter, formerly X, discourse about how this form of middle power cooperation outside of the framework of the United States is destined to fail, not only by U.S. adversaries, but by also U.S. allies, because they don't have enough in common with each other to make these types of mechanisms function. And I personally think I disagree with him, but we actually don't have evidence yet to the contrary. No one really knows. And so I think that's an important part of what we're going to see unfolding. The other thing I'll say is I'll be very interested to see how dedicated Lee Jae-myung will actually be to the middle power development and economic partnership for the countries that are looking to move beyond simply being critical minerals and low-level input suppliers into the supply chain, but actually wants to move up the supply chain themselves. South Korea, like a lot of other developed countries, talks a good game on this when they meet, developing talent, people-to-people exchanges, university and university, scientist-to-scientist exchanges, technology transfers, and things like that would allow these developing economies to move up the value chain. But the follow-through isn't always there, and that's not just with South Korea, that's with many other countries too. So I'll be interested to see how he pulls that off over the next few years, if he manages to.
Right, so we'll really have to see how much of an expansion would this opportunity bring for Korea's partners moving forward. Now, when we go back to the topics of the dialogue, Professor Song, one of the key goals was about securing critical minerals. And could you tell us how important are these partnerships for Korea's supply chains? And also, what kind of investment approach would work best in Latin America?
I think during his journey, President Lee has visited Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. And so those three countries are one of the most important members of the Mercosur, and also Chile has been, we have a free trade agreement since 2003. Of course, the size of the trade in terms of the percentage of the South Korean economy is less than almost 1.1% of between Chile. But Brazil has commanded 2.6%, and so it's a substantial. But particularly the rare earths and the mineral is very important, particularly in Chile and Brazil also. Particularly in Chile, there is copper and lithium is very important strategic resources for the South Korean our country would need for the development of semiconductor. But on the other hand, in Brazil, I would like to emphasize some kind of cooperation within because there is 7 different memoranda of understanding between President Brazil and President Lee of South Korea is that aerospace, that is one part. And what is very worth focusing is cybersecurity is another area, because Brazil has successfully launched some kind of PIX system which could replace the Visa and some master program for the usage of the credit card. So this is some to secure some kind of sovereignty of AI and how to make the most of the AI system to secure the sovereignty system in for our country. So to that regard, I believe that what is important is also in first question, I missed that answer because actually President Lee met 7 different venture capitalists, Silicon Valley venture capitalists in the San Francisco visit. And we must be careful. Some of them is Anderson and Horowitz venture capital is like they have committed a manifesto of the AI, which reminds the reminiscent of the manifesto of fascism in Italy in 1920s. So to that regard, there is some AI infrastructure investment combined with these venture capitalists is not necessarily limited to some political, economic issues. It's always beyond some economic range and reach some kind of political level.
Wow, so it seems there would be a variety of opportunities that would emerge moving forward. Now, what about Chile then, Professor Song? Korea and Chile, we also agreed to modernize our free trade agreement. What kind of new opportunities could this updated FTA bring?
Actually, Chile they have enjoyed really trade surplus so much because of free trade agreement. So we don't have not much to export to Chile, but we have so much from the natural resources such as copper and lithium, and that's why the Chile and the wines and Chile has enjoyed surplus. But of course, Chile and Argentina. Later on, I'm going to mention the Argentina. Chile is very important, some kind of resource at the time of emergency, because the rare earths and some important minerals and rare earths or some metals are for short, and Chile could be used as a reserve to be used for the case of emergency. But not much was produced in Chile, but clearly Chile is value to that regard, even though despite the total size of trade is very small.
Right, we'll certainly be looking forward to that. Now, Professor Rishi, if we look at the broader picture now, President Lee has now held bilateral summits with every G20 member except Russia. So with Korea set to host the G20 in 2028, like I've mentioned a while ago, how could this strengthen Korea's global standing?
First thing I would say, of course, is that 2028 is a long way away. And so we don't know what the politics, either domestically or internationally, are going to look like by then. And certainly, in the U.S. And frankly, also in other middle powers. So, I think we have to take a little bit of a circumspect viewpoint on how important discussions now are and deals now are for the future of the diplomatic clout that South Korea has. That being said, of course, one of the important things that South Korea gets to do through these types of meetings, looking towards its 2028 presidency of the G20, is to get an idea of the things that are important for other countries and then manage to, in advance, of course, of those meetings, trade some of the things that are important for influential members of the G20 with some of the things that South Korea wants to see on the agenda. Because, of course, one of the things that the president of the G20 has is significantly more power in terms of what makes it onto the agenda. So that's part of it. So this is in part an intelligence gathering operation. And of course, more broadly, it's always good to have more partners than not. I think the further credibility that South Korea is going to have looking towards 2028 is going to follow along with implementation, right? To what degree is South Korea going to manage to implement a lot of the things that it has put into place, whether it be with developed middle powers like the U.S. or Australia or Japan, or in Europe, or whether it be with developing middle powers like Brazil or Argentina. I think if South Korea really gets a leg up on implementing a lot of the things that it's been doing diplomatically over the last year, and even longer, then that will provide it with a real boost of credibility when it sets up the agenda for 2028 G20.
Right, it could definitely strengthen Korea's voice on the global issues as well. Now, finally, Professor Rishi, before we let you go, what kind of top priority do you think would be necessary in order for the latest outcomes to actually lead into lasting benefits?
Yeah, so since we're talking about this in the tech space, I'll go back to something that my counterpart said, which is that there are some downsides to some of this AI, for lack of a better term, bubble or AI development growth that we're seeing. And indeed, I think Professor is correct that we need to keep in mind that South Korea's economy is going to come under some stress in some cases from too much success, right? I mean, we've seen how the Kospi, the stock index in South Korea, has moved up and down in quite a volatile fashion because so much of its stocks are overweighted right now towards tech. So, obviously, South Korea's domestic stability is going to be important. Looking forward, I think really the two most important things in terms of implementing the types of deals that we've seen over the last year from the Lee Jae-myung administration is, first of all, getting the Blue House to support the relevant ministries in realizing and concretizing the agreements that have been worked out. Free the bureaucratic hands of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Energy and Industry, et cetera. Free their hands in some sense to be proactive in how it is that they use their bandwidth, which is somewhat limited compared to other countries in some cases, to be able to push these projects forward on the political side. But of course, the other major thing is a lot of this stuff is business, right? It's private sector oriented. So the private sector is ultimately going to have to put its money where its mouth is and actually engage in the types of projects, whether they be on the upper end of the tech supply chain or the foundational critical resource side of the supply chain.
We'll now definitely be watching closely to see how these agreements would be followed through. Now, that's where we'll have to leave our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Rishi.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, Professor Song, we really appreciate it.
Yeah, I enjoy it.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.